So we're a month out since we gave birth, and we finally feel ready to share the birth experience, the birth story. And it began when I was 41 and a half weeks pregnant. We were about a few days away from the max length that the birth center allows in terms of giving birth there. And so we decided to induce labor with a Foley balloon. And so we went into the birth center thinking that we would go in, we would get this Foley balloon inserted, and then we would leave and spend the rest of the day at home and just go about our day and hope that we get into labor soon.
And just a point of reference, a Foley balloon, they insert a stick up your...
It's a tube, I think.
A tube into your cervix, and then they put saline solution into the balloon through the tube, and they inflate the balloon inside of the cervix to induce contractions. So we thought we were just going in to get this balloon put in, and then we thought we were just going to go home and chill and wait until the labor happens.
But getting the balloon inserted, that was a whole feat because it took several tries before the midwife was able to actually get the Foley balloon inserted. And it actually took 2 midwives. So the first one, it took several tries. There was also a lot of blood that was being lost at the time to get this Foley balloon in. But finally, we got the Foley balloon in, and at the birth center, they do what's called an NST test, a non-stress test, before the Foley balloon is inserted and then after the Foley balloon is inserted to just make sure that baby is taking well to the Foley balloon. And so we were doing the NST test after the Foley balloon finally got inserted, and that's when we heard the first decels of her heart rate. And so the midwives, took note to that. They weren't like panicky or anything, but they were like, okay, that's not good. We shouldn't hear decels like that after the contraction. And so, the NST test, they're like strapping these 2 devices on me. One is to monitor contractions and one is to monitor the baby's heart rate. And so once they heard the deceleration, they're like, okay, she's not taking well to the Foley balloon, so we need to get that out.
And this was Cam's first felt contraction.
Yeah.
Like the Foley balloon actually succeeded in inducing contractions. And it was the first time the entire pregnancy that Cam felt a contraction. And when Cam's talking about a decel, it's a deceleration in the baby's heart rate. And what they told us is that decels are normal when they're earlier in the contraction.
Before the contraction.
But late decels, where the decelerations happen after the contraction, and if that happens consistently, it's a sign of fetal distress. It's a sign that the baby is in a stressed state.
Yeah. So we got the Foley balloon taken out, and then we continued to monitor to see if she got back to her baseline of like 130 to 140 beats per minute. Unfortunately, there was another decel that we heard, and so our midwife was like, okay, I think we need to transfer you to the hospital, which was just, it's a scary thing to hear, especially when we had this beautiful vision of giving birth at the birthing center, of a water birth. And I was really excited to just feel, contractions and get to like move through them and breathe through them and just be so connected to my baby, my body, my breath. I had been, doing a lot to prepare in terms of drinking red raspberry leaf tea and inserting evening primrose oil into my vagina and doing the perineal massage, like eating dates, like all of these things to prepare.
Chiropractors, masseuse.
Yes. I was like so excited to experience that sort of birth. But now the universe was showing us a very different scenario. And it was scary. It was really scary to hear those words come out of our midwife's mouth of just being like, okay, it's time that we actually we do need to go to the hospital. And I hadn't eaten all day because we thought that we would just be in and out of the birthing center. So I only had breakfast. But when we were thinking about getting food, after hearing...
I had food on the way
On the
to
way.
the birth center. I had ordered food to come to the birth center when the midwife told us that we would need to transfer to the hospital. And then I asked about the food and if we can somehow get the food. And the midwife actually suggested not to eat just in case we had to have a C-section. And why they don't want you to eat if you do have to have a C-section is because there's the risk of vomiting during the C-section and choking on your own vomit.
Oh my gosh, really? I didn't know
think
that
so.
was the risk.
I think that's the risk.
Oh gosh, okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the risk.
Wow.
Yeah, so they don't... We need to fact check that, but that's what I remember hearing. So they advised us not to eat. We had food on the way.
Yeah.
We were told we need to transfer to the hospital.
And so this was the first time just like hearing that, okay, a C-section might be actually highly likely given the D cells. And this was one of my...
I don't know if it was highly likely at that point.
Well, I think...
It seemed like it was
It
seemed like it was presented as a possibility
Okay.
when we were still in the birthing center.
I don't know. It kind of felt like it was
Got it.
highly likely given like how quickly they wanted us to go to the hospital,
Right.
you know, and just like,
Yeah.
but I think they were trying to be as like
Calm as
as
possible.
possible, but they were presenting this, you know, the possibility of having a C-section very clearly just so that we weren't like shocked once we got to the hospital. So that was like the preempt.
Yeah.
And so we had one of the midwives with us monitoring baby as we drove to the hospital, which was like 3-minute drive, super close to the birthing center, which is wonderful. But yeah, as soon as we got to the hospital, it was clear that like the hospital was prepped for
an emergency.
C-section.
They were acting urgently.
Yeah, very urgently. And so we got hooked up to their equipment at the hospital to monitor again the contractions, to monitor her heart rate. And she was back to 130, 140 baseline. And so they were like, okay, this is good. We don't need to go into an emergency C-section at this moment. We can kind of monitor her here and see how she does. And the hospital, like staff, like everyone was so empathetic to the fact that we were at the hospital. They were like, we know you don't want to be here. We know this was not part of your birth vision, your birth plan, but we really want to support you in the best birth possible. And so they were super respectful when we were like, hey, we still would love to do a vaginal birth if possible. And so they were like, okay, like we'll continue to monitor her heart rate. We'll monitor the contractions. And I was having contractions and she was taking well to them. We weren't seeing D cells when we got to the hospital. And that happened for hours.
Yeah, probably
Hours
5 or
and
6
hours and
hours.
hours. We were just monitoring and it was all good.
Yeah.
And so they finally confirmed that, hey, like we're going to go forth with the vaginal birth. We've monitored enough. Now we're going to do a stress test with Pitocin to see how she takes to Pitocin. And again, they're just monitoring the contractions. They're monitoring her heart rate. And we passed.
And before going on the Pitocin, Cameron was like 70% effaced,
70.
60 to 70% effaced, and about 4 centimeters dilated.
Yep.
And then we started the Pitocin.
And still the contractions, like even though I was seeing them on the monitor, like I wasn't really feeling them yet. But yeah, we got started on the Pitocin and we were on that for several hours, again, monitoring and
they were amping it up every 30 minutes. They were doubling the dose.
And she was looking great. They're like, wow, baby looks happy, healthy, still at a high, at the 130, 140 baseline. And we were singing songs. We were,
Singing
praying,
songs.
just
And singing
like
more songs.
yeah, some more songs. And just like trying to be as positive as possible. Like even though we were in this hospital environment, and the day did not go as planned at all, we were feeling hopeful that this birth, this vaginal birth vision that we were holding could still come true. And so, yeah, everything was looking great. And we finally asked, like, hey, could we take a break so that I could eat before we go into active labor? And so they respected that, they honored that, and we took like an hour and a half break from being, or given the Pitocin, me given the Pitocin, and we ate some food, which was really good.
The food that's been sitting there
But
the
yeah,
whole time.
that was sitting for hours and hours.
Yeah.
But I fueled up, which was, I think, necessary. And then we decided to go, we had the option, actually. We were given the option to do Pitocin again, and just ramp up the Pitocin, or we could get my water broken. And we decided to go with more Pitocin. So I got hooked back up, and was being dripped Pitocin. And then that's when we started to see D cells again.
And the second time when we took the break and continued with the Pitocin, it was actually back at the base dose of Pitocin. Yeah. So prior, we got up to like 8 milliliters per unit or something like that. And we started back at 2 after the break because the food break was too long. So we had to start all the way from the beginning. So low dose Pitocin. But continued.
Even at that low dose, it was like, okay.
I think they increased it to 4.
Yeah, I think we got to 4.
Yeah.
And my contractions were getting stronger.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, we saw the D cells happening. And at first it was like, okay, we see the first one.
Yeah. And
the nurse, she's like, okay, let's kind of change positions.
Yeah.
Because I also changed positions. When I was doing the first Pitocin stress test, I was sitting in this like upright position. And because now we were going into this Pitocin that would hopefully go into active labor, I was like, let me try to get some rest too, because it had been such a long day. Like we got to the birthing center at 10:30 a.m.
Yeah.
And now it was already 11 p.m.
Yeah.
Long day. And so I was in a different position lying back. And then we started to see the D cells. And so the nurse was like, let's try a different position. So I moved from one side to the other. And we were still experiencing D cells.
Yeah, both variable and late D cells. So there's early variable and late D cells. Variable are when they just seem to happen sporadically. And so there were a few of those, but the bigger concern was the late D cells. Yeah. That as Cam's contractions started to get stronger, those D cells were getting steeper and lasting longer. And at first they came in and they just kind of raised the flag. Nobody was super urgently rushing anything, but they just raised some flags. Yeah. Initially, and
they're like, okay, we're just gonna monitor this. Yeah. And we were like, okay. And then there was the drops kept coming and they were steeper. At one point, like you saw it go as low as like 54, like her heart rate dropping from a baseline of 130 to all the way down to 54 beats per minute. And then to see that consecutively, seeing that happen like each contraction, was terrifying. And then that's when like the big group of doctors came in, and SWAT team of doctors came in and were like, hey, we've been monitoring, her heart rate, and we're really concerned now. Like before,
or I think they came in before. They
with
said
just
we're
the-
really concerned,
Okay.
and it was more like, we're concerned.
yeah,
We would recommend a C-section.
yeah,
We'll
That's
give
right.
you some. We'll give you some time to think about it. We'll give you some time to. And we spoke through the options with the doctors and just got clear on that. They told us we could not do anything and just wait it out and see.
they gave us that
They
option.
gave us some options, but yeah, they came in initially and they were like, "We're concerned. We recommend a C-section. We'll give you some time to think about it."
Yeah. And then once the D cells got more intense,
Yeah,
that's when like they came in again
yeah,
and we're like, hey, so now we strongly recommend a C-section.
Yeah.
And we were still in this in-between phase between like a planned C-section and an emergency C-section.
yeah,
And they were just warning us that, hey, you do not want to go into an emergency C-section if you can avoid it. Because that would be me going completely under. So I would not be able to, like, I would have no awareness of the birth and what was happening. And then Elijah would not have been able to be in the operating room with me. And so that was also laid out. It's like, okay, this is kind of the difference. Like if we go in and there's still like time to put me in like, or give me an epidural, like I'll still be present and awake. And you'll be able to be there with me holding my hand. So they were kind of laying it out and then also still just like giving us the time to like make a decision and choose what feels in alignment for us. And also like saying like, yeah, there is a possibility that like you can continue like moving forward with a vaginal birth and maybe she'll be okay. But there's a risk. And of course, like in my head, like it was very hard to decide what to do because we're holding this vision for a vaginal birth and what that experience would be like. And yeah, now it was like, okay, one of my biggest fears is, being shown right in front of me and, what are we going to do? And of course, like in my head, I just didn't want to risk like her health.
yeah. And they said, I asked them very clearly what they thought the probability was of a successful vaginal birth.
Yeah.
And she said 20%.
Yeah.
And she acknowledged that that's not based on science. That's not a scientific study number. That's just based on her years of experience of seeing this stuff. So we got a 20%. That was her kind of guesstimate.
Not a great percentage.
Yeah.
And then also
1/5.
like I think for
1
us,
in 5.
yeah. Yeah, just not something you want to hear going into birth. And so for us too, I think we also had this idea of like, oh, hospitals, they're always pushing C-sections. And so I think that was also causing us to like question like, okay, is this like, can we trust this? Can we really trust what they're, saying? But we also were seeing on the monitor what was happening with her heart rate. And so that was already causing, fear and just uneasiness. And so we ended up calling your sister, Sasha, who
I think we called the midwife first.
Okay. We didn't. Okay.
Maybe.
I don't know. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Okay, so maybe we called the midwife first, and who was on call and just shared a bit about what was happening. She already kind of knew what had happened at the birthing center, and so we informed her the situation. And
yeah, it was hard for her to really give clear advice because she wasn't seeing what we're seeing and she wasn't liaising with the doctors. Yeah. But she did mention that based on everything she knew, that at some point these things become a matter of inevitability.
Yeah.
And that really stuck.
That did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we called my sister.
who her first birth, she had a C-section, and then since then she's had 5 beautiful, healthy births vaginally, and so it was just comforting to hear like her perspective, and just like recognize that, you know, I'm healthy and I'll heal from, you know, like a C-section is a very intense surgery, but that, you know, you can heal, and that it's going to be okay, and that also like we want to have more kids, and the potential to have vaginal births in the future is still possible even if you have a C-section. So that was all very comforting to hear, and then we made our decision.
Yeah. Because at that point they were pretty clear that we had to act with some level of speed.
Yeah.
And they already shot Cam up with something called terbutaline, which is supposed to quell the contractions. So actually they shot her up with this thing to stop the contractions, so that the baby doesn't continue to experience more distress as the contractions continued. So yeah, we were being urged to kind of act.
Make a decision.
Yeah, and as Cam said, it was hard to discern at certain points just how much we can trust what these people are saying. How much of this is true versus how much of this is just trying to create more profit for the hospital. And in the end, I see why people have doulas in these situations that actually have navigated these types of conversations before. But in the end, we decided to trust that the doctors knew what they were talking about.
And we asked our nurse.
Yeah. Yes. That was a key. That was
yeah.
a key piece of information. We had a nurse who was awesome.
Very sweet, very helpful.
Yes. And then she said, if I'm just going to keep it real with you, if this were my baby, I would 100% do the C-section. Yeah. And this is someone that has years of experience seeing these things happen. This is somebody who's a mother herself. And for her to look us in the eye and say, if this were my child, I would definitely do this. Yeah. And this was someone that we were building a rapport and trust with. I think it really hit for us.
Yeah. And so we decided to go with the C-section. And they kind of took my hospital bed, and I got taken to the operating room, and they were monitoring her heart rate, because they were still not sure if it was going to be an emergency C-section or not, depending on how she was doing. And her heart rate was still got back to the baseline. So they were like, okay, we can move forward with a C-section that involves an epidural instead of like putting me out completely. And so they were setting up for that. And during that time, you weren't there.
No, it was very scary.
Yeah.
And I was a little bit upset because they told me, they brought Cameron into the operating room and they told me they would be right back to get me. And they didn't come right back to get me. It felt like forever that I was just waiting with no information, without my wife in sight, not knowing what these doctors were doing, knowing that they were going to give her some sort of medications that may potentially impair her judgment, and I'm not there. So I was in between, like, do I turn up on these people in here and just try to like force my way into the operating room, or do I trust that she's in good hands and that they will honor their word and come and get me?
And so once they prepped everything and they shot me up with the epidural, and then got me on the operating table, strapped me down. And it was very scary, like just being in there with a bunch of doctors and nurses, bright lights, and my husband was not there. And just also full trust that this team was going to care for me and care for the baby. And so finally I'm like lying on the operating table and I'm shaking, like intense shakes. And you finally arrive in the operating table. And like the first thing you ask the doctor is like, is it normal that she's shaking this much? Because it was,
I thought she was in like a shock, like paraplegic shock. And it turned out it was just the side effect of the epidural.
And so, yeah, once you were in there, I think you were just holding my hand, and then they began the surgery. I'm like, that part is it's a little bit of a blur there, because I do think I still was in shock of what was actually happening, and like not being able to feel the bottom half of my body. It just was this very strange sensation, given that I was like so excited to feel everything with birth, and now and also like really wanted an unmedicated birth. And so now here we are, and I've been like shot up with so many different things, and I'm lying on this table, and they begin the surgery, and I think like I can feel like some tugging, but in terms of pain or anything, I wasn't feeling any of that.
Which is nuts.
Yeah.
Think about that. Like, think about how powerful these medications must be for this sort of surgery to occur and for her to not feel any pain. Yeah. Like, you're talking incision in the skin. You're talking move the abdomen, separate the abdomens. You're talking incision in the uterus. And not feeling any pain.
No. Hi, honey.
Well, hey, you're coming in close to your moment, sweetie. Were you following the story? You're like, this is my moment.
Yeah, she's like, this is when I'm coming in.
This is when I arrive. This is when I arrive. Great catch. This is when I arrive.
All right, little intermission. Where were we?
We were at the surgery, and you not being able to feel anything. You felt some tugging. I was with Cameron. I was holding her hand. I was whispering in her ear. I was rubbing her head, supporting her in all the ways that I could.
Yeah.
There was a drape, which is standard with C-sections, so Cam could not see what was happening. There's a curtain. And yeah, surgery happened.
And we hear her cry. And then, of course, we cry.
Yeah.
And we're just, like, crying with joy to, like, hear our baby for the first time. And, I couldn't see anything, but I could feel, like, her strength and her resilience. And Elijah goes, can I go check on the baby? Making sure that, like, I'm good, which I really appreciated. And then you went off to go see the babe.
For the first time. I'll never forget the moments I laid eyes on Luana. And she was freaking out. 10 out of 10 freaked out when she came out of the womb.
Yeah.
Because imagine, you're in this warm, dark womb where you're submerged in fluids. And then all of a sudden, there's some random people who you've never felt their energy or heard their voice before removing you from that home environment. And she was 10 out of 10 freak out. And when I went over to her, I can tell that she recognized my voice and that she knew who I was. And so they had her in the warmer. They had her in the warmer, just checking her out. They had the little ball to get mucus out of her throat and out of her nose, because when you have a vaginal birth, part of coming through the birth canal actually squeezes out these fluids that are inside the baby, but with a C-section that doesn't happen. So they had to manually get the mucus out, make sure she's good, check her toes, check her fingers, check her temperature, do all that stuff. And then I took her over to Cam.
Yeah.
I walked Luana over to Cam and...
Oh, she's spitting up.
Yeah, so I brought her over to Cam and I laid her on Cam's chest.
Yeah. And we're both crying.
Yeah. Sobbing.
And I remember you're like, she's so beautiful.
Yeah.
She's our daughter. She's so beautiful. And I'm like shaking, but like trying to hold her in my arms, and trying to do the best that I can, and just like looking at her right there, like under my nose, and just like in awe that she was here. Yeah, it was a really, really special moment for our family. And just getting to like feel her skin to skin on my chest, to feel Elijah holding us. And she started to squirm a little bit. I needed like a little support, keeping her in a good spot. Honey. Yeah, it was just an incredibly beautiful moment. Very different than what I had envisioned.
Polar opposite.
Very different. Yeah, very, very different. But still very, very beautiful and very profound. And just melted my heart. Big time. Just seeing her and holding her for the first time. Yeah, I just felt so connected to her. I felt so connected to you. Like, wow, we're a family.